In forgotten corners of Asia, where the mist clings to the roots of ancient banyan trees, and incense never truly stops burning, there are stories the living were never meant to remember. This is FolkFear, where ancestral curses, forbidden rituals, and the whispers of the dead come to life. Each tale you hear is rooted in real village traditions, in beliefs whispered over rice wine, in offerings made beneath blood moons and paper effigies that move when no one is looking. Tonight, we return to a Hakka village the world has long abandoned, a place where the dead do not sleep and the matchmaker's mistakes still echo through the bloodline. A porcelain bride waits beneath the altar, and her comb still drips. Welcome to the teeth beneath the altar, a ghost marriage never buried. The road to Gulan village was a narrow serpent of gravel and mud, winding like a vein through the hills. It hadn't been repaved in decades. The jungle pressed in on both sides, thick with vines, bamboo groves, and the incessant chorus of insects that sounded like warning bells buried in the foliage. Lian sat alone in the back of the rusted bus, watching rain snake down the window. Every now and then a shrine would flash past, red-roofed, moss-eaten, guarded by decaying stone lions with eroded faces. The driver hadn't spoken since they left the city hours ago. When she'd told him her destination, he just glanced at her in the rearview mirror and muttered, "You're going up there, alone?" She was, and she hated it. Her grandmother was dead, and now she had to bury her. Not just the body, but everything she never wanted to remember about this place. It had been nearly 15 years since she'd left Gulan behind. 15 years of city life, art school, bad relationships, coffee shops, and forgetting how many dead things lived in the forest back home. She had built a life free from incense smoke and ancestral tablets, from whispered prayers and red-threaded talismans. Her childhood had been a long ritual of silence, her grandmother always telling her to hush, to bow, to burn this and never touch that, to never speak when the bell chimes on its own. But the city had no bells that chimed without wind, and no altars that whispered at night. So she had grown to believe the fear had been planted in her, not real. Until last week. The phone call came just before dawn. Her aunt's voice was flat, emotionless. "She's gone. Come home. We need to bury her before Ghost Month begins." Lian hadn't planned on staying more than a day or two. She thought it would be simple: sign the paperwork, light a few sticks of incense, endure a short ritual, and leave before night fell. But as the bus curved around the final bend and the mist rolled across the road like spilled milk, something deep in her stomach turned. Because she remembered this fog. It never left the village. It wasn't weather. It was a veil. The bus dropped her at the edge of a moss-covered stone gate, carved with the Hakka characters for Gulan ancestral soil. The moment her shoes hit the earth, she felt it. A low vibration, barely audible, like teeth grinding under the soil. No one came to greet her. The village looked like a fossilized memory. Crooked rooftops, ancestral plaques hanging above doorways, chickens pecking at red candles that had melted into the dirt, wind chimes spun without wind. Children stared from behind paper-covered windows, their faces pale as bone, disappearing when she looked directly at them. Her grandmother's house was at the far end of the village. It had always been the largest, perched above the others like a shrine of its own. 3 floors of dark wood, red pillars and curling roof tiles blackened with age. 2 stone lions stood at the entrance, their mouths agape in silent screams. One was missing its head. The front door was already open. Inside, the house smelled like rainwater, incense ash, and something older, something fermented and metallic. The walls were covered in faded red paper charms, their ink nearly invisible. Spiderwebs danced in the corners like ghosts caught mid-whisper. The ancestral altar took up half the main hall. It was untouched, pristine, as if someone had been tending it all this time. But the bowls were full of moldy rice, the incense was burnt to the base, and yet smoke still curled upward from one unlit stick. Her aunt emerged from the shadows of the hallway, wearing a white mourning robe. Her eyes were sunken, her mouth thin. "You came late. She's already cold." "I took the first bus. There was fog. The road was bad." But none of it felt right here. Excuses didn't belong in Gulan. They dissolved like ash. She nodded. "Where is she?" Her aunt turned and led her down the hallway. The floor creaked under their weight, each step echoing as though the house was hollow underneath. It smelled stronger here. Sweet, rotting, almost floral, the kind of smell that clings to temples and funeral parlors. At the end of the corridor, a door stood half open. Her aunt paused. "She's not at rest." "What do you mean?" There was something she didn't finish. Something she carried too long. The villagers say the altar started whispering before she died. She stopped eating, kept chanting, and then she died with her mouth open and her hands full of ash. She stepped into the room. Her grandmother lay on a bamboo mat, her skin gray-blue, lips cracked. But her eyes were open and filled with dried blood. That night, Lian couldn't sleep. The room she was given was the same one she used to stay in as a child, facing the old altar. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her grandmother's hand reaching from the shadows, holding a comb, carved from something that didn't look like wood. At 2:16 a.m., the wind chimes outside her window began to spin. She sat up, heart racing. Then she heard it, a soft, steady scratching coming from beneath the floorboards, like something buried, trying to claw its way up. She pressed her ear to the wood, and through the ancient silence of the house, a voice like dry paper whispered, "Bride, unfinished." The next morning, the fog was thicker. It didn't roll or swirl, it clung to the rooftops, to the trees, to Lian's skin like something alive. It was the kind of fog that swallowed sound and made even footsteps feel muffled. When Lian stepped outside, she noticed the chimes on the porch were no longer spinning. They were still, silent, watching. She hadn't slept. Not after what she'd read in her grandmother's diary. Not after hearing scratching beneath her feet again, only to find nothing when she lifted the floor mat. Something was wrong with this house. Something had been waiting. Her hands trembled as she returned to the chest from the night before. The lock, which had refused to budge yesterday, slid open easily now, as if the object inside had been expecting her. Lian opened the lid. Inside lay a long, lacquered box, the wood dark as dried blood and etched with faded symbols. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment, hesitant, but something pulled at her, a compulsion, or maybe an inheritance. She opened the box. There, resting on a folded piece of red silk, was the comb. It was carved with delicate teeth, intricate floral motifs, and, unmistakably, it was not made of wood. The color was pale, yellowed slightly with age, and it felt oddly warm in her hands. Bone, polished, shaped, human. And next to it was the doll. Porcelain, barely the size of her palm, dressed in a faded red chipao, its tiny hands folded together. Its eyes were painted shut, but the mouth had been sealed with red wax, melted and hardened, like it had been screaming when silenced. Lian's breath caught. Her grandmother hadn't just sealed the girl's spirit into the comb. She'd given her a vessel, a face, the porcelain bride. She dropped the doll back into the box and shut the lid, heartbeat pounding in her ears. But the moment the lid clicked shut, the chimes outside began to spin violently. Then stopped. Lian backed away. The floor beneath her groaned with each step. Something shifted in the room. The light dimmed, not from the fog outside, but from within, as though the shadows were thickening on their own. Her reflection in the mirror across the room caught her attention. She moved, but it didn't move with her. The reflection stood frozen, still holding the lacquered box, its eyes open just a second too long, its expression far too calm. Then, slowly, it smiled. Lian gasped and turned away. The box slipped from her hands and thudded to the floor, but the lid didn't open. The comb stayed inside, waiting. She ran to find her aunt, only to discover the woman kneeling in front of the altar, burning paper offerings. Her mouth moved in silent prayer, eyes closed, sweat beading on her forehead. "I found something. The comb, the doll, in that box under her bed." Her aunt didn't look up. "You shouldn't have touched it. You knew it was there? Some things are meant to remain unfinished. Once you touch them, they recognize you." "Recognize me?" Her aunt opened her eyes now. The pupils shrunk, voice tight. "She's looking for someone to finish what your grandmother couldn't. The girl's soul was never released, and she's angry. She was promised peace and given silence." "I didn't mean—" "She doesn't care what you meant." Her aunt's voice shook. "She cares that you carry the blood. You're next in the line. The spirit remembers, and she remembers betrayal." Lian wanted to leave, right then, right there. But when she walked to the front gate, the path was gone. The road that led out of Gulan had vanished into mist, so thick it looked like sky. The driver who dropped her off hadn't returned. No one answered her calls. Her signal bar was gone. The village was folding in on itself. That night, she placed the lacquered box inside a drawer and shut it with force. She taped it shut for good measure. She didn't want to look at the comb or that terrible doll again. But the dreams came anyway. She saw a red wedding procession. Women dressed in veils, their faces covered in fine silk, each one holding a bouquet of ash. Their feet didn't touch the ground. Musicians played pipes that dripped with black oil, and the sedan chair at the front bled from its corners. And inside that chair sat a doll. Not porcelain now, but flesh. A child bride, her skin pale and veined with black thread. And in her hand, she clutched the comb, stroking it through her hair, even though she had none. Lian woke screaming. The room was cold, too cold. She turned on the lamp and froze. The box was open. The doll was gone. Frantically, she searched the room, lifted blankets, pulled drawers, checked corners. Nothing. But just as she backed away from the bed, she noticed something behind the altar cabinet, wedged between the wood and the wall. She pried it loose with shaking hands. It was the doll. Someone, or something, had nailed it to the wall behind the altar, its arms pinned down, mouth wax broken. The threads binding its feet were snapped. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply whispered, "What do you want from me?" And in that moment, only then, did she notice the red thread. It had unraveled from the doll's robe. And now it was tied around her finger. The next morning, Lian found a bowl of sticky rice and congealed pig's blood sitting on her doorstep. No note, no explanation, only the scent of salt, iron, and rot carried on the mist that never seemed to lift from the village. She didn't touch it, she didn't move it, she only stared. Because deep in her memory, buried beneath years of city noise and modern logic, she remembered what that offering meant. It was not meant for the living. She rushed to her aunt, still half in her mourning robes, lighting incense for the seventh-day vigil. "Someone left blood and rice at my door." Her aunt's expression did not shift. "Then something has taken notice of you." Lian's stomach turned. Why would someone leave that? Her aunt sighed, tired. "In Gulan, when the dead are unsettled, we leave them offerings to ease their hunger, blood to honor their pain, rice to fill the silence in their bellies. But you should not have drawn attention. Something is waiting for a mistake." "I haven't done anything." Her aunt turned slowly, her voice now brittle. "You touched what was sealed. You dreamed what was buried. And worse." She picked up a charred piece of folded paper from the altar tray, half burned. "This was not the offering I prepared last night." Lian's hands trembled. "What do you mean?" She showed her the sigils, inked for a bride's spirit, not a mourner's. "You burned the wrong effigy. You gave her permission." "Permission for what?" "To follow." Later that day, the sky grew unnaturally dim. No clouds, no rain, just a heavy dullness, as if the sun itself had turned away. Lian tried to distract herself. She cleaned the room, swept the hallway, rearranged bowls at the altar. But the doll remained in the drawer, no matter how many times she moved it. The thread still tied itself around her fingers by morning. She had stopped unwrapping it. It always returned. By evening, she heard the villagers outside whispering. One of them had died suddenly, an old man found in his fields with his tongue removed, placed neatly on a folded funeral cloth beside his body. No wounds, no blood, no trail, just silence and a mouth open in terror. Her aunt returned pale, shaken. "They think it's the bride." "The doll?" "No, not the doll. The girl inside it. She was never properly wed. Your grandmother tried to seal her with the comb, but it was never accepted. Her soul remains unacknowledged, half here, half in the dark." "So she's punishing people?" "She's hungry." That night, Lian sat in front of the ancestral altar, trying to steady her hands enough to light the incense. The flames flickered violently, even without wind. The air felt full, like something unseen stood over her, breathing. She lit 3 sticks, bowed, whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you." But the smoke curled in the wrong direction, into the altar instead of away from it. And something behind the wooden panels knocked twice. Thump, thump. She backed away. The flames surged, and one of the ancestral tablets split down the middle. Then she saw it. In the ash bowl beneath the central statue of Guanyin, a human tooth, small, yellowed, cracked, and next to it, a torn piece of red cloth. Lian ran outside to clear her head. The air was cooler than usual, and fog swirled thicker around her ankles. She looked up at the banyan tree near the edge of the village. There was something hanging from the branches. She stepped closer. Branches creaked. They were paper brides, folded by hand, delicate and crude, with red threads for hair and black dots for eyes. at least 20 of them, all hanging by the neck. And beneath the tree, a red veil, child-sized, soaked in mud and something darker. When she turned to leave, a figure stood behind her. It was a Taoist priest, old, hunched, with a long beard and a robe frayed at the sleeves. His eyes were milk white, yet they followed her perfectly. "You burned the wrong effigy," he rasped. Lian stared. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He only lifted a bundle of joss paper tied in red string and held it out to her. "If you want her to leave, you must offer the right things, not just anything. The hungry dead are not all the same. Some take rice, some take ash, but this one," he leaned in close, his breath cold and bitter, "wants what was taken from her." Back at the house, Lian unfolded the joss paper bundle. Inside were a strip of bridal silk, a dried umbilical cord, and a shard of porcelain shaped like a mouth, and a note written in brushstroke characters. "Do not speak to her directly. Do not wear red. Do not let her see your reflection. Burn the offerings, bury the comb. If the wax breaks again, run." Lian's hands trembled. She looked toward the drawer. The doll's wax-sealed mouth had cracked open again. She ran to the field behind the house and began digging with her bare hands. The soil was wet, packed with roots. Her fingers bled. Still, she kept digging. When she was deep enough, she placed the comb inside, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt relief. The wind stopped. The chimes fell silent. She stood, hands filthy, clothes soaked. Then a child's voice behind her, soft, whispering, "You buried me without a name." Lian turned, but no one was there, just a small trail of wet footprints leading back to the house.
Lian awoke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a silence so deep it throbbed in her ears, like the house itself had stopped breathing. The sky outside was gray, as always. Mist pressed against the windows like dirty cotton, refusing to let sunlight through. Something was wrong. She felt it immediately. Her hair was wet. She sat up, confused. Her scalp was damp, her pillow soaked. Not with sweat, not with rain, with water that smelled faintly of river silt and something older. She walked to the mirror, still groggy, and froze. There were comb marks across her scalp, long, even, carved lines from forehead to nape, as if someone had combed her hair while she slept. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen the comb since she buried it, hadn't dared check the drawer since. She ran to the field, barefoot, heart pounding. The patch of earth where she had buried it, disturbed. The soil was soft again, loose, turned over. And in the center of the dirt lay the lacquered box, open. The comb rested atop the red silk once more, clean, untouched, as though it had never been in the ground at all. Lian didn't take it back to the house. She couldn't. Instead, she wrapped it in burlap, tied it shut with string, and placed it in a clay jar she sealed with salt and ash, an old Taoist wording method her grandmother once used for trapping malevolent spirits. She tucked the jar in the corner of the shed, beneath broken tools and rotting firewood. But even as she walked away, she heard it. A soft click, like teeth snapping together. Inside the house, the mirrors had begun to change.
The one in the hallway still showed her face, but her eyes lingered too long, blinked too late. Her reflection smiled when she wasn't. The small mirror in the washroom fogged over without steam, and when she wiped it clean, the message reappeared each time in smeared condensation. Groom waiting. She covered the mirrors with cloth, all of them, every pane of glass, but something in the house had already learned to watch. That night, she heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, dragging, too light to be an animal, too soft to be human. Then came the combing. She didn't imagine it, the steady, rhythmic pull of a comb through hair, but it wasn't coming from her room. It was coming from behind the wall, the ancestral wall, the altar. By candlelight, she approached the shrine. The candles flickered violently as she neared. The floor beneath the altar pulsed like a heartbeat, and the longer she stared, the more she noticed. A mirror she hadn't seen before. Tucked behind the ancestral incense bowl, half hidden in shadow, was a small bronze mirror, old and tarnished. It hadn't been there before. Lian reached for it cautiously. Her fingers trembled as she tilted it toward her face. But her reflection wasn't alone. Standing just behind her shoulder, half shadow, half child, was a figure in red. A girl. Eyes black as ink, lips stitched shut with threads that bled into her cheeks. Her hands held the comb, and she was smiling. Lian dropped the mirror. It shattered. The figure was gone. But from the altar, a thin crack now split the central tablet, her grandmother's name. And from that crack, a single tooth rolled forward and landed at Lian's feet, still red, still warm. The next morning, her aunt returned from the cremation site with news. Another villager was dead. A middle-aged woman who once rejected a ghost marriage proposal for her stillborn daughter, found in her courtyard hair completely removed, every strand pulled out at the root. No wounds, no blood, just a broken comb placed over her mouth like a funeral offering. "She's begun choosing her own brides," her aunt whispered. Lian's knees weakened. "She wasn't meant to. That match was denied," her aunt continued, voice breaking. "The gods never approved the union, but your grandmother forced it, and now the girl's soul, twisted by loneliness and rage, seeks to complete the wedding by any means. She wants me?" Her aunt didn't answer, but her eyes said yes. Lian knew she needed help. She returned to the banyan tree and left 3 sticks of incense, bowed and whispered the name she had been taught as a child but never dared to speak aloud. "Master Tian, Spirit Binder, Keeper of Knots, I call you." At sunset, he came. The Taoist priest, eyes clouded, robes frayed. He stood beside her like a shadow. "You've seen her now," he said simply. "Yes, she's chosen you. You carry the blood of the matchmaker. You touched the comb, you buried it, unburied it, slept with it. Now she believes you are the one meant to finish what was begun." Lian's voice shook. "How do I stop it?" Master Tian knelt and pulled from his satchel a red wax seal, a talisman brush, and a black jade ring. "You don't stop it," he said. "You marry her." The wind changed. It came not from the mountains, nor from the river, but from within the village itself.
through cracks in old wooden doors, beneath thresholds marked with red paper, and down narrow alleys where the fog had begun to gather like guests waiting in silence. The villagers called it the hollow breeze. It always blew before a spirit wedding. Lian stood at the window, staring down the crooked lane toward the banyan tree. Paper lanterns had begun appearing without hands to hang them. Red, faded, torn, they lined the path like mourners. And then she heard it. Drums. Low, hollow, and slow, like distant thunder in a bone chamber. A rhythm meant not for ears, but for spirits. She knew the sound from old stories. This was the drum of the ghost procession, a funeral not for the dead, but for the unwed. Her aunt appeared behind her, face pale, voice shaking. "She's gathering her wedding party." "What does that mean?" Lian whispered. "It means she no longer waits, she walks." They moved to the ancestral altar room together, clutching bundles of joss paper and talismans. The house seemed to pulse with something ancient. The mirror above the altar was still covered, but the cloth now trembled with movement beneath. Master Tian arrived at sundown, silent as mist. He did not knock. He carried with him a red paper sedan chair, no taller than a child's torso, folded perfectly and bound with silver thread. Inside sat a blackened incense stick, already half burnt, and beside it a miniature comb carved of bone. "She is preparing," he said. "The groom is coming." "I thought the match was denied," Lian said, voice barely audible. "It was, but in death the lonely make their own rules." They laid protections around the house, salt, ash, burnt peachwood charms carved with Taoist seals. But Lian knew, deep down, none of it would hold. The bride had chosen her. That night, the village changed. The fog grew dense, lanterns lit themselves. No one walked the streets. Dogs howled once, then fell silent for hours. And then the procession began. It started with the music. Pipes, high and shrill, playing a wedding song meant to wake the dead. Drums pounding like footsteps from beneath the earth. Then came the horns, bent and rusted, screaming through the mist in long, painful wails. And through it all, the chime of anklets, delicate, repeating. The sound of a child's spirit walking toward her own wedding. Lian watched from the upstairs window. They came barefoot. Dozens of bride effigies, life-sized, their bodies made of paper and bone, veils trailing behind them. Some were headless, some moved with limbs backwards, some had mouths sewn shut. And at the front, 4 faceless pallbearers carried a real sedan chair. Not paper, but wood, dark, soaked with something that dripped onto the stones with every step. The door of the chair was open, waiting. And behind them came the groom, or what remained of him. He walked slowly, dressed in rotting military garb from a war no one remembered. His face was veiled, but his boots were soaked and left puddles of river water wherever he stepped. His hands were gray, bloated, dragging. But it was his presence that broke the air. He didn't walk toward the altar. He walked toward her. Lian's aunt began chanting, fast and breathless. Master Tian lit talismans in every corner, the paper burning without flames. The mirrors shattered behind their cloths, doors rattled, nails bled. Lian knew, deep down, none of it would hold. The bride had chosen her. Tried to run, tried to move, but her feet wouldn't respond. From the courtyard below, the sedan chair began to lift on its own. It floated, and then turned slowly to face the house. A red thread snaked from its door and crept up the steps like a worm, slipping beneath the threshold, wriggling under the floorboards, rising toward her. It wound around her ankle, pulled, hard. She fell. Master Tian drew a sword from his satchel, iron, rusted, ancient, and sliced the thread just as it reached her neck. It snapped with a shriek so loud that it cracked a window pane. The procession stopped. All eyes turned toward the house, and from the sedan chair, a figure stepped out. She was no longer a doll, no longer a child. The porcelain bride had become flesh. Her skin pale and bruised, her lips cracked, her eyes leaking tears of black ink. She wore the red wedding gown of ancient Hakka custom, covered in funeral dust and stitched with gold thread that read, "Till death joins us." She opened her mouth and whispered one word, "Come." The lights died, every candle extinguished. Lian collapsed, and when she woke, she was no longer in her room. She was inside the sedan chair. The air was thick and hot. The veil covered her face. In her hands, someone had placed the comb. Outside, she heard the chimes, the drums, and the voice of the groom, soft and wet, whispering, "Now you are mine." Lian awoke in her own bed, but something was wrong. Her hands were stained red, her feet were dirty with soil, and her nails were chipped as though she had been clawing at wood. She looked down and saw the comb resting on her chest, perfectly clean, polished, restored. Her aunt's door was shut, but the red thread hung from the doorknob. No knot, no break, just gently swaying, like it had led her back home. Her aunt refused to speak. Whatever she had seen during the night procession had left her lips sealed and eyes unfocused. She sat cross-legged at the altar, whispering prayers with trembling hands, fingers fumbling over talismans that wouldn't light. Even Master Tian had left. He said nothing as he walked out before dawn. He only looked at Lian once and muttered, "Your family buried something too deep. Not even the gods can bless this soil now." That morning, Lian returned to her grandmother's chamber. The mist hadn't entered the house, but it clung to the windows as though waiting for permission. Everything was just as it had been the day her grandmother died, except the floorboards. They were marked. Thin scratches in the shape of circles and characters, drawn in salt and blood. She traced one with her finger and felt it pulse beneath her touch like a heartbeat inside the wood. Something was under here. She searched the room, pushed aside the cot, lifted rugs, tapped at the edges of furniture, and finally found it. A small hatch, hidden beneath a cracked cabinet, covered with red paper talismans so old the ink had turned to rust. She peeled them away and opened the door. The passage beneath was steep, narrow, lit only by the flicker of Lian's candle. The walls were clay, hand-dug, with bones embedded in the earth like forgotten offerings, chicken skulls, broken teeth, and infant anklets green with oxidation. She descended slowly. The air was damp, heavy. Every breath tasted like incense soaked in river water. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a room, and what she saw made her knees buckle. It was a ritual chamber, built beneath the altar, hidden from gods and villagers alike. The floor was etched with a massive yin-yang circle, charred from repeated burnings. Around it hung wedding garments, red dresses sewn for the dead, their hems stiff with ash, pig hearts in jars, bundles of black hair tied with silver coins. Dozens of porcelain dolls, cracked and silent, lined one wall like an audience of children waiting for their names to be called. At the center of the room sat a stone basin filled with stagnant water, and beside it, resting on a cloth of dried marigolds, was her grandmother's diary, a second one, thick, leather-bound, sealed with black thread. She untied it, hands trembling. The first page read, "For the one who inherits my mistake." And beneath it, her grandmother's name, Li Yin Shu, Yin Matchmaker, 1944 to 2025. The entries were fragmented, scribbled, almost frantic. The girl was stillborn, but her soul clung to the cord. It cried in the walls, it drew blood from the goats. I sealed her in porcelain to stop the house from rotting. No family would take her, no spirit would receive her. The gods rejected every match. They turned the ashes cold, they cracked the offerings. Then came the soldier. He died drowned, his body bloated, drifting for days. His mother begged me to bind him to a bride, but she brought no dowry, only bones and river water. I agreed, out of pity or arrogance. I don't know. The ritual began, but the candle wouldn't stay lit. The bell wouldn't ring. The ox bone burned black. It was forbidden. I went on anyway. She screamed from the comb. She said she did not want him, that she would take a better groom herself, that she would find a family who would finish the wedding willingly. I locked her away. I used the doll. I used the wax. I buried her under the altar. But I can feel her growing stronger. She wants someone who carries my blood. She waits for the next woman. If she ever escapes, she will choose her groom, and her priest, and her price. Lian stopped reading. Her breath caught, her hands shook. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a contract, and she was the final signature. She closed the diary and stepped back from the altar. The room felt smaller now. The doll seemed to turn. The water in the basin had begun to ripple despite the still air. And then she saw it. At the far wall, a mirror. Its surface cracked, blackened, hidden behind a funeral shroud. She pulled the cloth away and saw herself. But she was not alone. In the mirror stood her reflection, dressed in red, veil drawn, holding the comb. But behind her stood her grandmother, eyes hollow, lips stitched shut. And beside her, the bride, the same girl from her dreams, older now, stronger, face no longer blank, but contorted with grief and rage. She lifted her veil and whispered, "You will do what she would not." The mirror shattered. When Lian turned around, the dolls had all fallen, every single one, face down, arms outstretched as if reaching toward her. The diary burned itself on the altar, and from beneath the floor, the drum began again.
The house was no longer quiet. It breathed now, walls expanding and contracting like lungs hidden behind timber and stone. Every beam groaned, every shadow flickered with intention. It felt like a creature stirring in its sleep, dreaming of her. Lian sat at the edge of her bed, the diary's final words echoing in her mind. She will choose her groom and her priest and her price. The mirror on the wall remained shattered. The dolls beneath the altar chamber had not moved, but she felt them watching her still, eyes made of silence, mouths sewn with secrets. She hadn't touched the comb, but it was back on her pillow again. She tried to burn it, wrapped it in talismans, drenched it in kerosene, lit the match with shaking hands. But the flames refused to touch it. They bent around the comb like wind parting for stone. The fire hissed, sparked, then died entirely, leaving behind a trail of black smoke that rose in the shape of a girl's face. She screamed. The smoke whispered, "Not yours to destroy." The next day, she found the dress. It hadn't been there before. A red wedding gown, folded carefully on the ancestral altar bench, trimmed in gold thread, embroidered with lotus flowers and dragons. The fabric shimmered despite the dim light, untouched by dust. No note, no name, but it fit her exactly. She knew because it was already hanging in her wardrobe. Her aunt wouldn't speak. She had gone quiet days ago, sitting on the floor of the altar room, unmoving, muttering prayers in a language Lian no longer recognized. She had begun tearing her hair out in strands, burning it over incense. Her eyes had gone distant, past grief, past fear, somewhere between devotion and surrender. When Lian begged her to leave with her, to run, she only said, "She's already dressed you. It's too late." That night, Lian dreamt of the banyan tree, but it had grown taller, impossibly tall, its branches scraping the clouds, its roots pulsing with red thread. She stood beneath it, wearing the red gown. The ground beneath her was soft, wet, squelching with every step. She looked down. The earth was made of hair, black, endless, still growing. And then the drums began again. When she woke, the dress was on her, not laid out, not draped. She was wearing it, buttons fastened, hem brushing the floor, veil covering her face. She screamed, she clawed at the buttons, tore the fabric, pulled the veil off in blind panic. Her reflection in the mirror had not moved. It remained still, smiling. And behind her, the groom. Later that day, 3 more villagers were found dead. One woman hung upside down from her doorframe with her mouth stuffed full of red thread. A man drowned in his own bathwater despite never drawing a bath. A child missing, only her shoes found, facing backward at the threshold of the altar hall. They were unrelated, unconnected, except each had once declined an offer of spirit marriage, and each had in the past asked her grandmother to put the past to rest. The red dress would not come off.
She tried knives, scissors, fire, water. Each time it mended itself. She scrubbed her skin raw, tore at the stitching, but it clung to her like memory, woven into her bones. She wandered the house in it like a ghost inside her own skin. Outside, the villagers no longer made eye contact. They burned offerings in silence, whispered her name only behind closed doors. They had seen the red gown, and they knew what it meant. In old stories, red was worn by brides and spirits alike, the color of joy, the color of blood, but never both. Master Tian returned at sunset, pale and thin, leaning heavily on his staff. He entered the house without looking at her and sat at the altar in silence. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "She's made her choice. You are now the vessel for the marriage. Your body is the offering, your womb the seal." Lian's mouth went dry. "I didn't agree to this." He looked at her, eyes hollow. "Your grandmother did, and in this place the dead remember every promise." Lian shook her head. "What happens if I refuse?" He lit an incense stick that burned black instead of white. "Then the village dies, slowly, one by one, until you say yes." At midnight, she stood before the altar, shaking, wrapped in red. The candle flames turned blue. The mirror turned black. From the shadows stepped the bride. Not a child now, but fully grown. Her face was pale, eyes weeping blood, gown soaked in river water. She stepped forward without sound, her feet never touching the ground. Behind her, the groom emerged. His face was wrapped in burial cloth. His hands held the wedding scroll. His mouth moved without sound. Master Tian raised his blade. "Speak now, or the pact is sealed." Lian backed away. "No," she whispered, "I won't be her." The bride looked at her and smiled. "You already are." Lian collapsed, and the dress refused to loosen.
The house groaned as Lian descended into the earth. The hidden door beneath the altar opened easier this time. No resistance, no noise, as if the house had grown used to her presence now, or welcomed it. She carried only a lantern this time. No talismans, no incense, no prayers. She already knew they wouldn't work. The steps were damp and uneven, carved from ancient stone softened by time and moisture. The air grew colder with every breath, but not like wind. It was a dead cold, a cold that didn't move, didn't shift, a cold that waited. When her foot landed on the clay floor of the chamber, she heard it. Drip, drip, drip. Water or blood? She wasn't sure anymore. The chamber hadn't changed much. Same blackened altar, same marigold bundles dried to dust, same porcelain dolls lining the shelves with cracked mouths and empty eyes. But now, the basin in the center was full, not with water, with hair. Black, tangled, floating just beneath the surface, as though a head rested inside. And the walls? They had grown teeth. Small human teeth were embedded in the clay around the room, arranged in neat spirals just above eye level. Some were cracked, some gold-capped, some tiny, infant molars.
They hadn't been there before, and they pulsed. Lian stepped to the altar. The ashes had formed a circle. Inside it, the comb, still whole, still gleaming. But beside it now lay a new object, a pair of red bridal shoes, tiny and caked in mud. They hadn't been made for her. They were too small, yet something about them felt familiar. Then she saw the name stitched on the soles. Li Mei Lin, the name of the girl her grandmother tried to marry off. There were new scrolls, too, fresh ones, still wet. Ink smeared across the parchment showed 2 sigils bound in red, one for the girl and one for her. Not the original match, a new match. The scroll was signed not in ink, but in blood, her own. The mirror at the far end of the chamber had changed. It was no longer cracked. It was clean, waiting. She stepped in front of it and saw herself, not in the red wedding dress, not as a woman, as a child, dressed in funeral white, holding the comb in one hand and a red lotus in the other. Behind her, the porcelain bride stood tall, watching. But now her veil was torn, and her mouth, once sealed with wax, was stitched shut with Lian's hair. Lian turned away, heart racing, and stumbled against the side wall. There, beneath a torn funeral curtain, she discovered something else. A stone tablet with names etched in fine characters, dozens of them, each marked with dates, years, matching symbols, contracts, ghost marriages, each one arranged by her grandmother, each one done in this room, and each one ended in a death. Some were children, some were soldiers. One name was crossed out violently, carved over and over until the stone cracked. Li Mei Lin. Suddenly, the basin of hair began to boil. No fire, no movement, just steam and the sound of something rising. She backed away as fingers emerged, small, delicate, soaked in black water. Then a face, bloated and pale. Then eyes, hollow, shining. The bride rose from the basin without breathing, her long hair dragging behind her like a veil made of roots. And in her hand was the ring. Not a spiritual charm, not a talisman. A real iron ring, sharp, ancient, forged for the dead. She held it out to Lian, an offering, a demand, a warning. "I won't," Lian whispered, backing toward the stairwell. The bride tilted her head. Then she spoke, not with sound, but with blood that bled down the walls, forming words. "You were born beneath this altar. You were named above my prison. Your grandmother promised you the moment your mother bled into the earth." Lian gasped. "What are you talking about?" The blood continued writing. "You were always meant to be my body. The wedding was not denied, it was delayed." She ran, stumbled up the stairs, slipped, crawled. The chamber behind her howled, not wind, not scream, but the sound of something unsealed. The dolls on the shelves shattered one by one, and the final one, the largest, split down the center. From within it, something crawled. A creature, a girl, a bride reborn. When Lian burst into the altar room upstairs, her aunt was gone. Only the prayer bowl remained. Inside it, a tongue, neatly severed, folded in a lotus blossom of rice paper. Another offering, another warning, another soul claimed. The red wedding dress hung from the ceiling now, swaying without wind, and beneath it, the red bridal shoes, not the tiny pair from the chamber, but her size, polished, clean, set facing the altar, waiting for her to step in. Ghost month arrived like a breath held too long. The sky turned gray and never returned to blue. Birds stopped singing. Dogs refused to bark. Even the insects, the constant night-chirping heartbeat of the village, fell silent. In Gulan, this was the month when doors were left open for the dead to visit. But Lian knew this year something wasn't visiting. It was rising. The river, once calm and brown, began to churn. Each morning, villagers found muddy footprints along the bank, too large for a man, too wide for a child. The footprints pointed not outward toward the forest, but inward, toward the village. They whispered of something drowned, something betrayed, something returned. The groom. Lian felt it before she saw him. It began with the mirrors. Every reflection now showed two figures, herself and another standing just behind, sometimes just a shadow, sometimes a flash of teeth, sometimes a full face, pale and bloated, with eyes so black they swallowed light. At first she covered the mirrors, then they uncovered themselves. One night she woke to dripping. Drip, drip, drip. She sat up slowly. There was water on the floor, and in the corner of the room a boot print soaked and pressed deep into the wood. She followed it out into the hall, where the scent of riverweed and rot grew stronger with each step. At the end of the corridor, the door to the altar room stood open. Inside, someone had written on the wall in river silt, "The bride is ready. Where is the groom?" The elders gathered. 4 remained. They hadn't spoken to outsiders in decades, but now they came to the house in silence, placing jars of salt water at each entrance, chanting old protective verses from the Qing dynasty scrolls. One of them, the oldest, touched Lian's forehead and whispered, "Your blood is no longer your own." When she asked what he meant, he pointed to the comb, now displayed on the altar. It had begun to grow teeth, small, human, uneven, as if the comb itself was feeding. That night thunder rolled through the sky with no rain. Lightning flashed white and did not fade for 5 full seconds, and with the light, he came. Lian saw him through the window first, the groom. His silhouette stood at the edge of the banyan tree, half draped in a funeral veil, dressed in what was once a military uniform, now waterlogged, sagging, covered in mud. His hands hung limp at his sides, one leg bent wrong, his neck twisted slightly, as though broken long ago. And though his face was covered, he saw her. She couldn't move. He didn't walk, he drifted, the river clinging to his feet, each step leaving behind a puddle that steamed and sizzled against the dry earth. He stopped at the altar gate, then lifted his hand and knocked 3 times. The house answered. Doors swung open, windows unlatched, the flame on the altar flared blue, then green, and on the table a scroll unfurled by itself, a marriage scroll. But the names were new, not Li Mei Lin and Zhao Ren, but Lian Yun and Zhao Ren. Groom sealed by river, bride sealed by blood. Signed in black ink, stamped in red. She screamed, tore the scroll apart, burned the pieces, smashed the altar bowl. But the scroll appeared again by dawn, intact, whole, waiting. Master Tian returned, but not alone. He brought 3 monks from the northern temple, silent, veiled, and barefoot. They carried no weapons, only drums. They began a ritual to disrupt the binding, chanting, burning sulfur, pouring salt across the thresholds. But when they began the final verse, something struck the house, Boom! The walls trembled, cracks spread across the ceiling. Boom! Windows shattered. Boom! The front door flew open and water poured in. When the flood receded, only one monk remained alive. His eyes were gone, burned from the inside. He whispered, "The groom is not seeking a marriage, he is seeking vengeance. He was betrayed in war and betrayed in death. He was promised peace, denied by heaven, denied by your bloodline." Then he collapsed, and his body melted into river mud. Lian found the truth in her grandmother's final scroll, hidden beneath the altar stone, wrapped in hair. The soldier Zhao Ren had not drowned in battle. He had been murdered by the villagers, stabbed and thrown into the river by those who feared he carried plague. His mother, desperate for peace, begged the Yin Matchmaker to bind him to a spirit. But the match failed. The girl screamed. The gods rejected it. The village paid no price. Until now. Now the bride wanted a body, and the groom wanted a bloodline. And the only way to finish it was to bind them through her. The house no longer hid the haunting. It welcomed it. The walls bled ink. The altar moaned at dusk. The wind through the broken windows whispered names Lian had never spoken aloud, but recognized all the same. Names from her bloodline, names carved into the comb. The bride wanted a vessel. The groom wanted a name. And the contract, signed not with pen but with inheritance, would not fade. The villagers no longer left their homes. Doors were boarded, mirrors shattered. Red paper talismans fluttered uselessly in the breeze, as though too ashamed to admit they'd failed. Only Lian walked now, in red. The dress refused to be removed. Its threads grew tighter each night, sewing into her skin like roots. She tried to cut it, burn it, strip it. And each morning it returned, whole, pressed, waiting. Master Tian sat at the center of the altar room, surrounded by unlit candles and crushed herbs. He looked older now, his skin sagging, his eyes hollow. The monks were gone. The river had taken them. "It must be finished," he said, voice barely above a breath. "What must?" asked Lian, though she already knew. "The match, the ritual, the marriage. It must be completed according to ancient law, or both spirits will tear through this village until no name remains to remember it." "There must be another way." "There isn't. The binding was attempted, but never sealed. The bride remains unwed. The groom remains unblessed. You are the bloodline. You carry the debt." Lian stood in silence as he unfurled the marriage scroll again. This time the ink was fresh, no longer spectral, real. At the top, her name, blood of the matchmaker, flesh of the air. And beneath it, Zhao Ren, riverbound, spirit without shrine. Master Tian lit 3 sticks of black incense and placed them in the dragon urn. "They must be wed before the 7th moon rises tonight, before the gate closes. If not, they will no longer need your body." Lian swallowed. "What will they take?" He looked at her. "Everything." The preparations began. The villagers, silent, afraid, delivered what they could. Paper furniture, hell notes, incense shaped like wedding gifts, a coffin made of sandalwood, a red bridal carriage pulled by 4 faceless paper oxen, and finally, a mirror with no reflection. She stood before it in silence, unable to see herself, Only the dress, only the comb, only the binding thread that now pulsed around her wrists like roots woven from hair. At dusk, they began the ritual. It was held beneath the banyan tree, its branches now twisted with dolls, teeth, and red silk offerings that moved even when the air was still. A circle was drawn in ash, salt poured around its edge, talismans pinned to the roots, the basin of river water placed at the center, flanked by 2 incense braziers. Lian sat across from the empty sedan chair. A spirit chair, the priest called it. But it was not empty for long. As the final bell tolled, the bride emerged. She rose from the basin, body pale, soaked in water that steamed despite the cool air. Her eyes were open now, fully, terribly. In her hands, the comb and the red veil. She walked to Lian and placed the veil over her head, gentle as a mother. Then she vanished, and the groom arrived. He came from the earth, not the river, crawling, climbing, his face hidden behind layers of funeral cloth. He did not walk. He slithered, half man, half grief. Master Tien stepped forward and spoke the words, ancient vows, older than paper, passed down through whispers and blood. Spirit of Xiao Ren, do you accept this match? The wind screamed. Spirit of Lian Yun, do you accept this bond? The veil tightened. The comb in her hand burned, but her voice would not rise. She could not say yes. She could not say no. So she said nothing, and the silence was taken as agreement. The final step was the joining of breath. She leaned forward. The veil parted. The groom's face was still hidden. A single black thread floated between them. She inhaled. He exhaled. And her lungs filled with river water. She collapsed. The villagers scattered. The sky split in two. And for a moment, everything was quiet. The drums stopped. The wind stilled. The tree froze. And in the silence, Lian opened her eyes. She was not in her body. She was in hers. The bride, the girl, the one who had been stillborn, buried, bound, now inside Lian's soul. They stood together in a field of mirrors, each one showing a version of her life that could have been, if she had never come home, if her grandmother had never signed the match, if she had never been born into this promise. The girl spoke for the first time. I was promised peace. They gave me silence. I was promised release. They gave you. Lian's voice cracked. What do you want from me? The bride stepped closer. I want to rest. Then take the body, take the dress, take the comb. The bride shook her head. No, you must carry the memory, or it all returns. And then Lian awoke, in her own body, but not in her dress, in white. The red dress now hung on the banyan tree, fluttering like a warning. And the groom? Gone. So was the scroll. So was the altar. So was Master Tien. The next morning, the banyan tree bled. Red sap dripped from its branches like veins torn open by memory. Birds did not return. The wind held its breath. And the red wedding dress still hung there, fluttering in air that did not move. It should have been over. The bride had veiled her, the groom had breathed through her, The match was made, but Lian felt no peace, only pressure, like something beneath the earth had only just begun to stir. The village was silent, but not with relief. The elders had burned the altar scrolls, thrown salt into the river, recited every protection prayer they knew. Still, nothing changed. A baby was born without a mouth. A young man coughed up river water for hours before drowning in an empty field. A widow screamed herself hoarse, claiming her husband's spirit now slept beside her. The haunting had not stopped. It had multiplied. Lian returned to the house. It smelled different now. Sweet, sharp, metallic, like rust blooming from the walls. The floors were damp. Her reflection no longer appeared in any surface, not even her own pupils. In the center of the altar room, the red veil lay crumpled, and under it, the comb. But it was no longer bone white. It had turned black, charred, twisted, still whole. Master Tien reappeared at dusk. His robes were scorched, his fingers bandaged. He said nothing at first. He only sat down before the empty altar, lit a final stick of incense, and whispered, "They tricked us." Lian's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The match was never about peace. It was about power." He opened his satchel and pulled out a scroll, one she'd never seen before. It was older, fragile, brushed in real gold leaf. The cursed bride, born of womb unblessed, matched to soul unwashed. Should the union be forced, she shall split into many. Bride becomes binder, blood becomes seed. Lian stepped back. "What seed?" He looked up at her, eyes full of shame. "You were not married to a ghost, Lian. You were made into one." That night, the wedding ceremony restarted itself. No one lit the fires. No one played the drums. No one invited the dead. But the red oxen walked the road. The paper brides danced beneath the banyan, and the altar caught fire on its own. Inside the flames, the scroll appeared again, but this time it bore 7 names, all women, all descendants, all still alive. Lian's was the last, the final seal. The villagers panicked. They blamed her, called her the matchmaker's daughter, the cursed bride, the vessel. They threw stones at her home, painted talismans over her door, not to protect her, but to bind her inside. Some even called for her burial beneath the altar, like the old traditions dictated. "If she won't finish it, then we bury her like her grandmother should have," one old man screamed. But it wasn't rage in their voices. It was fear. Master Tien stood between them. "She is not the cause, Lian. She is the closure. If she completes the binding properly, the curse will end. But you must let her choose." Silence followed. Then a voice from the crowd, childlike but hollow. "She already did." Lian turned, and there among the villagers stood the bride. No longer porcelain, no longer veiled. A young woman of impossible beauty, eyes as black as morning ink, hair as long as memory. She wore Lian's skin, her face, her breath. Only her smile was different, too still, too knowing, too dead. She stepped forward and whispered, "You gave me your name. I gave you my freedom. Now I want your place."
The comb appeared in her hands. The crowd fell to its knees. Master Tien drew his blade, and the sky split in two. A storm rose not from above, but from below. The earth cracked. The banyan tree caught fire. Every shrine in the village burst open, spirits pouring out like moths freed from centuries of sleep. And from the center of it all, the bride's scream, no longer human, no longer bound. Lian reached into the flames and grabbed the scroll. It didn't burn her, it welcomed her. She bit her finger and rewrote the names, removing her own, adding only one, Li Meilin, daughter of the broken promise. Then she threw the scroll into the river, and for a moment all went still. The wind stopped, the fire froze, the bride blinked, and then she wept. The veil turned to ash, the comb crumbled, the dress fell to the ground in threads, and the bride vanished. But the river kept rising, and the altar would not stay cold.
The river refused to recede. It crawled into the village like a living thing, seeping into doorways, soaking the altar steps, filling ancestral urns with water that did not reflect the sky. And from the edge of the current, a soft chanting could be heard, not in the voice of the living, but in the voice of something learning how to become one. Lian hadn't slept since the bride vanished. She sat in the altar room, barefoot, draped in white, her fingers raw from unrolling scrolls that no longer contained ink. They had emptied themselves, forgotten their stories, forgotten her. The house was crumbling. The air was thick with wet ash. The red dress was gone. The comb had turned to soot. And yet, the haunting remained. Master Tian was dying. He lay on the floor beside the cold brazier, breath shallow, lips gray. "She tricked us all," he rasped. "It wasn't about the marriage. It was about inheritance. A vessel cannot become the bride. She needed someone to carry her into the living world." Lian stared. "You mean she wanted to be reborn?" He nodded once. "Not as a ghost, not as a name, as flesh." "But I stopped her. I rewrote the scroll." Tian's eyes fluttered. "You rewrote the terms, but you didn't seal the gate." That night, the gate opened. It didn't appear in the ground or in the river or even in the sky. It opened inside her. Lian woke choking on smoke, her mouth full of ash, her skin burning from the inside out. She stumbled to the altar room, collapsing at the foot of her grandmother's shrine, and from the mirror, long covered, now uncovered, she saw herself. But she was not alone. The bride stood behind her, whispering words only her blood could hear. Then Lian fell. She awoke in a place with no light, a space that pulsed like a womb, warm, wet, full of heartbeat. It wasn't earth, it wasn't water, it was memory, and all around her stood the others, dozens, hundreds, women, girls, each one dressed in red, each one veiled, each one hollow-eyed, all brides, all vessels, all trapped. At the center of them stood Li Meilin, no longer a child, no longer a spirit, a woman now, whole, beautiful, terrible. "You offered your name," she said, her voice echoing through bone. "You wore my dress, you took my comb. Now the debt is due." Lian tried to run. Her legs would not move. "What do you want?" "3 choices and only one door. From her sleeve she pulled 3 talismans, each marked in red. Silence, the offering of your voice. Hollow, the offering of your womb. Ash, the offering of your life. Choose, the bride said, eyes unblinking, or I'll take them all. Lian wept. Why me? Because you were born under the altar, because your grandmother broke the seal, because blood remembers. Lian fell to her knees, then lifted her hand. She chose the 2nd talisman, hollow. I offer the child I'll never have, she whispered. The moment the talisman touched her skin, it burned. Her stomach twisted, her bones rattled, her veins turned cold. A scream burst from her mouth, but never reached the air. The bride surrounded her, hands on her shoulders, pressing, pulling, whispering. And then, one by one, they faded. Ash to wind, wind to silence, silence to memory. Lian collapsed. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her body. The river was gone. The altar had crumbled. The village stood, quiet, whole, untouched. And Master Tian was gone. She stood alone and wept. Not for the bride, not for the village, but for the life she would never carry. In the ashes at her feet, something shimmered. A ring, black jade, cold, waiting. She picked it up, placed it in her pocket, not out of fear, but because the past never truly lets go.
Morning came quietly. The mist still hung across the fields, but it no longer pressed against the house like a visitor waiting to be let in. The river had receded to its original banks. The banyan tree stood stripped and blackened, its branches bare, its roots no longer bleeding. The red wedding dress was gone. So was the bride. So was the groom. So were the drums, the shadows, the whispers in the mirrors. But Lian did not feel free. She felt hollow. The house was silent now, truly silent. Her aunt's room was empty. Her shoes remained by the door, untouched. No scent, no trace, not even a name left in the registry of the dead. It was as if she had never been. The altar room was cold. No incense, no talismans, just dust. The space above the shrine where generations of ancestral tablets once stood, now bare. She ran her hand along the surface. Only ashes remained. And beneath them, etched faintly into the wood, a comb's outline, scorched and permanent. Lian sat in the center of the room for a long time. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply listened to the walls, the beams, the silence. And after some time, she realized the truth. The house had stopped breathing. At dusk, the villagers returned. They did not speak to her, but they left offerings at the gate. Jars of rice wine, lanterns, candles that would not stay lit, paper dolls folded with no faces. And on one piece of rice paper, written in red ink, "Thank you. Forgive us." She walked to the banyan tree alone. There, at its base, was a small bundle wrapped in silk. Inside, a mirror with no reflection, a jade ring, and a bone comb. Not the comb, a new one, untouched, uncursed, still waiting. Lian understood what it meant. She had not ended the tradition, she had become its guardian. The bride had passed, the groom had vanished,
The curse had been fulfilled. But the world still birthed restless souls, still lost children too early, still drowned men with no graves, still left wounds that bled into the next life. And someone with blood that remembered, had to keep the peace between the living and the forgotten. She returned home and opened the floor beneath the altar one last time. The ritual room was as she'd left it, dusty, empty, collapsed at the edges, but in the center sat a blank scroll, waiting. She picked up the brush and wrote, Lian Yun, keeper of the quiet marriage, binder of shadows, witness to the unnamed. She placed the comb on the stone basin, lit 3 sticks of incense, and closed the chamber door. Above her, the altar groaned. The wood bent, sighed, sealed. The whispers stopped. At midnight, the wind passed through the village once more, but it carried no voices, only silence. Blessed, respected, feared. The kind of silence that only comes after something ancient has been fed. Lian now wears white, not for mourning, but for duty. And each ghost month she walks the banyan path, placing offerings for those whose names were never spoken aloud. No one asks questions anymore. No one knocks on her door. But when a house groans too loudly, or a bride dies too young, or a soldier returns in water, they come to her. And in the altar room, beneath the sealed floor, the scroll grows longer. The names return, and the silence remains.